Welcome back to Mr. Cursed. In today's video, I'm telling you 5 scary stories about hitchhikers in the deep Appalachian Mountains. These stories will make you never want to pick up strangers on dark mountain roads. Even truck drivers and people who have lived there for years won't stop to help anyone after it gets dark. But before we start these creepy stories, please hit subscribe. Don't forget to like the video and share it with your friends. I'd love to know where you're watching from in the comments. Thanks for watching. It really helps me out. Now let's start with these scary mountain stories. I'm 26 and work as a freelance photographer, mostly doing assignments for outdoor magazines and tourism boards. Last month I was driving through eastern Kentucky, heading back from a job documenting old coal mining towns for a historical society project. It was late October, already getting dark by 6 in the evening, and I was trying to make it back to the main highway before the mountain roads got too dangerous to navigate. Right now I'm sitting in a Waffle House off I-75, and I keep checking the parking lot every few minutes because I'm not sure that thing is done with me yet. I'd spent 3 days in a little town called Millfield, way back in the hollers where the roads aren't even on most GPS systems. The job was documenting what was left of the mining infrastructure. Old tipples, company houses, that sort of thing. Most of the families had moved away when the mines closed in the 80s, leaving behind a handful of older folks and a lot of empty buildings slowly being reclaimed by the forest. The drive out should have been simple enough. One winding mountain road that eventually connected to Route 15, then straight to the interstate. I'd driven worse roads in my time, and my Toyota Tacoma handled mountain terrain pretty well. But as I was coming around a bend about 10 miles outside Millfield, I saw someone standing on the side of the road with their thumb out. It was a young woman, maybe early 20s, wearing clothes that looked like they belonged to a different decade. A long wool coat despite the mild weather, and a floral dress underneath that reminded me of something my grandmother might have worn in the 1950s. Her dark hair was pinned back in an old-fashioned style, and she carried a small suitcase that looked like genuine leather, not the modern stuff. I'm generally careful about picking up strangers, especially in remote areas, but she looked harmless enough. And honestly, leaving someone stranded on a mountain road after dark didn't sit right with me. So I pulled over and rolled down my window. "You need a ride somewhere?" I asked. She smiled and walked over to the truck, moving with this strange gliding sort of walk like her feet weren't quite touching the ground. "I'm trying to get to Hazard," she said. Her voice had that soft Appalachian accent, but something about it sounded rehearsed, like she was trying to remember how the words were supposed to sound. Hazard was about 40 miles in the direction I was heading anyway, so I told her to get in. She climbed into the passenger seat with that same weird, too smooth movement, placing her suitcase carefully on her lap. The moment she closed the door, my truck's heater started blowing cold air. Not just cool, actually cold, like someone had hooked up an air conditioner in the middle of October. My radio, which had been picking up a country station from Lexington, filled with static and then went silent. Even my phone, which had been getting decent signal, suddenly showed no bars. "Thank you kindly," she said, folding her hands over the suitcase. "It's been such a long time since anyone stopped." I glanced at her in the rearview mirror as I pulled back onto the road and felt my stomach drop. She didn't have a reflection. The passenger seat looked completely empty in the mirror, even though she was sitting right there next to me, close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something floral and old-fashioned, with an underlying scent like damp earth. "So, what takes you to Hazard?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual while my mind raced through possible explanations for what I was seeing. She didn't answer right away. I counted at least 15 seconds of silence before she finally said, "Family business. I have people there who've been waiting for me." The road ahead started looking wrong. I'd driven this route twice in the past 3 days, and I was sure there had been a bridge about 5 miles from where I'd picked her up. But when we reached that spot, there was just more winding mountain road with no sign that a bridge had ever existed. The landmarks I remembered, a distinctive rock outcropping, an old barn, were nowhere to be seen. My fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should have been. I'd filled up in Millfield less than an hour ago, but the needle was already showing half a tank and falling steadily. "You know," she said suddenly, "you have such a nice voice. I bet your mama loved hearing you call her name when you were little." I hadn't told her anything about my family. Hell, I hadn't even told her my name. But something about the way she said it made my skin crawl. About 15 miles down the road, I started noticing the animals. Deer were standing in the tree line, dozens of them, all facing the road and watching as we passed. Their eyes reflected in my headlights like little points of fire. I'd grown up hunting with my dad in the mountains of Virginia, and I'd never seen deer behave like that. They should have bolted the moment they heard the truck engine. She began humming something under her breath, a tune that seemed familiar but wrong somehow, like a lullaby played in a minor key. The sound sent shivers down my spine and seemed to make the deer more agitated. They started following us through the trees, keeping pace with the truck at 30 miles per hour. When I looked down at her hands, I noticed they were different than when she'd gotten in. Her fingers were longer, more skeletal, and her nails had grown into yellowed points that looked more like claws than anything human. My rearview mirror kept showing headlights behind us, but every time I slowed down or tried to get a better look, the road behind us was empty. Just darkness and the occasional pair of deer eyes glinting in the tree line. She started asking me questions, personal questions that made my hands tighten on the steering wheel. "Tell me about your house," she said. "The little white house with the green shutters. Your bedroom on the second floor with the quilt your grandmother made." I'd never mentioned my house to her. I'd never mentioned my grandmother. But she was describing my childhood home in perfect detail, down to the color of the shutters and the specific quilt on my bed. "How do you know about that?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. She smiled, and I caught a glimpse of her teeth in the dashboard light. They were too sharp, too pointed, like something designed for tearing meat. "I know lots of things," she said. "I know your mama still keeps your room exactly the same. I know she calls your name sometimes when she's lonely, just to hear how it sounds in that empty house." The temperature in the truck kept dropping. I could see my breath now, little puffs of vapor in the headlight glow. But she didn't seem affected by the cold at all. No visible breath, no shivering, like the temperature change didn't apply to her. My truck's shadow on the road was wrong. In the moonlight, it looked like we were driving something much larger, with too many passengers. The silhouette had extra shapes that didn't match what was actually in the cab. Road signs started appearing for towns I'd never heard of, despite having lived in Kentucky my whole life. Boneyard Creek, 12 miles, and Whisper Ridge, 7 miles, with arrows pointing toward dirt roads that definitely hadn't been there on my previous trips through the area. "You know what I love about mountain folk?" she said, turning to look at me directly for the first time since getting in the truck. "Y'all are so polite, always stopping to help a stranger in need." When I looked at her profile, her face was shifting. The changes were subtle at first, her jawline becoming more angular, her cheekbones more pronounced, but each time I glanced over, she appeared less human than before. My phone kept making sounds like it was receiving calls, but when I checked, the screen was black and unresponsive. Through the dead speakers, I could hear faint voices that sounded like my family members calling my name, but distorted and wrong, like recordings played at the wrong speed. "Such a nice family you have," she continued. "Your sister with her pretty blonde hair, your daddy with his bad heart. They worry about you driving these mountain roads alone at night." I'd never told her I had a sister. I'd never mentioned my father's heart condition. But she knew details about my family that I'd never shared with anyone outside our small circle. The deer in the trees had multiplied. Now there were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all moving through the forest parallel to the road. Their eyes created a constellation of reflected light in the darkness, and they were all focused on our truck. I tried to slow down, to pull over and figure out what was happening, but my foot wouldn't respond properly. The gas pedal seemed to have a mind of its own, keeping us at a steady 35 miles per hour no matter what I wanted to do. In my peripheral vision, she looked completely different. Larger, taking up more space in the seat than should have been possible, more skeletal, with arms that seemed too long and joints that bent in wrong directions. But when I turned to look at her directly, she would snap back to almost human appearance. "You ever hear the old stories?" she asked, her voice taking on a different quality, like it was coming from somewhere deeper in her chest. "About the things that live in these mountains? The things that were here before your people came?" I had heard stories. Growing up in Appalachia, you heard all kinds of tales about things in the woods. Most folks dismissed them as superstition, stories told to keep children from wandering too far from home. But sitting in that truck with something wearing human skin but moving, it was like a predator. Those old stories didn't seem so far-fetched anymore. "I've been walking these roads for a very long time," she continued. "Longer than your grandmother's grandmother. Longer than the Cherokee who used to hunt these ridges. I remember when the first white settlers came through the gap, so scared of what they might find in the wilderness." Her face was changing more rapidly now, becoming something that belonged in the shadows between trees rather than sitting in a truck cab. Her eyes had taken on a yellowish glow, and her smile revealed rows of teeth that were definitely not human. "You know what I love most about giving folks rides?" she asked, reaching toward me with fingers that had become long, skeletal claws. "It's the look in their eyes when they realize they're not the one driving anymore." I understood then that this wasn't about getting to Hazard. She was something that fed on travelers, something that had been hunting these mountain roads for longer than anyone could remember. And I was just the latest person stupid enough to stop and offer help. The deer outside weren't just following us anymore. They were surrounding the truck, moving in perfect coordination like they were part of some larger organism. In my headlights, I could see their eyes weren't quite right either. Too intelligent, too focused, like they were extensions of whatever was sitting next to me. She lunged toward me with those claws extended, aiming for my throat. I yanked the steering wheel hard right, sending us skidding off the road toward a stand of old oak trees. As we left the asphalt, she let out a sound that was part scream, part howl, part something else entirely. "Sacred ground," she hissed as we approached the trees. "You cannot take me there." I didn't understand what she meant until I saw the small cemetery hidden among the oaks. Old headstones, some dating back to the 1800s, arranged in neat rows around a tiny chapel that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. The truck crashed through a low stone wall and came to rest against one of the larger monuments. She was already dissolving like smoke, but not before leaving deep claw marks in my dashboard and passenger seat. The gouges went all the way through the vinyl to the metal underneath. "I know your scent now," she said as she faded. "I know where you live. I'll be waiting when you come back through these mountains." The deer scattered in all directions, and suddenly everything was normal again. My radio crackled back to life, my phone showed full signal, and the heater started blowing warm air. The road signs showed familiar names and correct distances to towns I actually recognized. I managed to get the truck started and drove straight to this Waffle House, staying on major highways and avoiding any mountain roads. But every few minutes, I see movement in the parking lot just outside the range of the streetlights, and when I called my mom to let her know I was safe, she said the strangest thing. "Honey," she said, "someone's been calling the house all evening. When I answer, they don't say anything, but I can hear breathing, and it sounds just like you." I've been researching Appalachian folklore online for the past 2 hours, reading about things called fetch spirits and mountain haints that can take human form. According to the old stories, they're drawn to lonely roads and isolated travelers, feeding on fear and sometimes taking the place of their victims. The claw marks are still in my truck, deep gouges that no animal I know could have made. I took photos, but they come out blurry and distorted, like the camera can't quite focus on whatever made those marks. I'm going to drive straight home tomorrow, sticking to interstates and avoiding mountain roads altogether. Because I know she's still out there, waiting in some hollow or ridge for the next person kind enough to stop for a hitchhiker. And according to what I've read, these things never get a scent once they've marked you. Looking back now, I still don't understand why I survived. Maybe it was pure luck that I crashed near that old cemetery, or maybe something was protecting me. But I'll never pick up another hitchhiker, especially not in the mountains. Some roads are meant to stay empty, and some folks standing on the roadside are better left behind. The old-timers around here have a saying, Not everything that looks human is. I always thought it was just mountain superstition. Now I know better. I'm writing this at 3:47 a.m. because I finally understand what happened on Devil's Backbone Road, and honestly, I need someone to know the truth. I'm 28 now, work third shift at a warehouse outside Charleston, and I've gotten used to being awake when the rest of the world sleeps. But this isn't about insomnia or night shift blues. This is about the 3 days I lost 6 months ago, the 847 extra miles on my odometer that I can't explain, and the photographs on my phone that prove time itself can break. See, my psychiatrist says it was a dissociative episode triggered by stress. Dr. Martinez is a nice lady, real professional, and she makes a good case for it. October was rough. My ex-girlfriend Sarah and I had been trying to work things out, driving back and forth between Charleston and Morgantown every weekend for 2 months. The relationship was dying slow, and I knew it. But you know how it is when you're trying to save something that's already gone. The stress was getting to me. Sleep schedule was messed up from all the driving, eating nothing but gas station food. Makes sense I'd have some kind of breakdown, right? But psychiatrists don't know about the photographs. In my phone, there are 247 pictures I never took. Every single one shows the same stretch of mountain road from different angles. Some from inside my car, looking out. Some from outside, looking at my blue Honda Civic parked on the shoulder, some from way up high, like someone climbed a tree to get the shot. The road is always the same, that winding section of Devil's Backbone where the old streetlight flickers, mile marker 23 visible in most of the shots. Here's what really gets me. Every photo has the same timestamp. 11:43 p.m. on October 15th, all 247 of them. But the lighting changes from bright afternoon sun to deep night to early dawn and back again. I've stared at these pictures for months now, and I can't make sense of it. How do you take 247 photos at the exact same time showing the same place in different lighting? The most disturbing part is the figure in the background of each photo. Always in the same position on the left side of the road, thumb extended, backpack over one shoulder. Always hitchhiking. When I zoom in on him, and I've zoomed in on every single picture, he's wearing different clothes. Sometimes a green flannel shirt and jeans, sometimes a dark jacket and khakis, once what looks like an old-fashioned suit. But the face is exactly the same. Young guy, maybe early 20s, brown hair, friendly smile, like he's genuinely happy to see me coming down that road. My credit card statements tell an impossible story too. I bought gas 17 times that night at stations across 3 different states, West Virginia, Virginia, Kentucky. 17 transactions, 17 receipts, all time-stamped 11:43 p.m. I've called the credit card company twice about it. The first lady said it was probably a computer error, but she couldn't explain why the charges went through at stations hundreds of miles apart. The second person I talked to got real quiet when I explained the timing, put me on hold for 10 minutes, then came back and said the transactions were all valid. I drove to some of those gas stations afterward just to see. The clerks remember me. Not from that night specifically, but they remember a guy in a blue Honda coming through multiple times, always looking confused, always asking what time it was. One guy in Beckley said I'd been in there 3 times in what felt like an hour, buying the same items, coffee, beef jerky, a bottle of water, and paying with a credit card each time. Said I looked like I was sleepwalking. But the worst part is what I found in my trunk when I finally got home. A hitchhiker's backpack that isn't mine, olive green cat. Canvas with leather straps, the kind they don't make anymore. Inside were things I can't explain. Journals written in my handwriting describing conversations I don't remember having, gas station receipts from places I've never been, and a road atlas with a route marked in red ink that loops back on itself like a figure 8. The journals are what really mess with my head. According to what I apparently wrote, I picked up the same hitchhiker 73 times. Each entry describes a slightly different conversation, but it's always the same guy, always getting in my car at exactly 11:43 p.m. on that stretch of Devil's Backbone Road. In some entries, he tells me he's heading to college at WVU. In others, he's visiting family in Kentucky. Sometimes he says he's going home, sometimes he's running away from home, but he always gets in the car, and according to my own handwriting, the drive that should take 20 minutes sometimes lasted hours. My handwriting gets stranger as the journal entries go on. Normal at first, then shaky, then barely legible. His shadow falls upward, I wrote in one entry, and when he speaks, the words come before he moves his mouth. Another entry. Passed my own car today. The other me looked terrified and tried to speed away when I waved. And then, toward the end, the mile markers keep repeating. Mile 23, mile 23, mile 23. We're not getting anywhere. He knows we're not getting anywhere. The final journal entry is just one line repeated 847 times. He won't let me stop driving. I've looked at security footage from the gas stations where my card was charged. 3 of them were willing to show me, and what I saw doesn't make sense. There I am, clear as day, walking into the store, buying gas, paying with my card. But I'm moving wrong, like someone sleepwalking or being controlled. My eyes are open, but I'm not really looking at anything. And in 2 of the videos, you can see my car through the window with someone sitting in the passenger seat, but the camera angle or lighting makes it impossible to see who. Traffic cameras picked up my car too. The state police showed me the footage when I filed a missing person report on myself. Yeah, that's as weird as it sounds. My Honda passed the same mile marker on Devil's Backbone Road 73 times in what the timestamp says was a single hour. Not 73 times over the course of the night, but 73 times between 11:43 p.m. and 12:43 a.m. The officer who showed me said he'd never seen anything like it, figured it was some kind of technical glitch with the cameras. Cell phone tower data shows my phone connecting to towers in a pattern that would require impossible travel speeds. Beckley to Morgantown to Lexington and back to Beckley, all within minutes of each other. The phone company says it's impossible, but the data is right there. What I remember clearly starts on October 15th around 11:30 p.m. I was driving home from what turned out to be my final conversation with Sarah. We'd had the breakup talk, the real one this time, and I was feeling emotionally drained, but also kind of relieved. It was over, finally, and I could stop pretending it was going to work out. I was taking the back roads through Devil's Backbone to avoid the interstate traffic, listening to some old country station that kept cutting in and out with static. The radio had been acting up for about 20 minutes, picking up fragments of songs, then losing the signal, then picking up different stations entirely. I remember thinking I should probably get it checked, but it wasn't urgent. Just one of those things you put off until it becomes a real problem. That's when I saw him. A young man with a backpack, thumb extended, standing under that flickering streetlight near mile marker 23. Something about the scene felt familiar, like déjà vu, but stronger, like I'd driven past this exact moment before, which I knew was impossible since I'd never seen a hitchhiker on his road before. I slowed down and rolled down my window. He walked over with that friendly smile, the same one I'd later see in 247 photographs. "Where you headed?" I asked. "Forward," he said, which struck me as an odd answer. "Can you be more specific?" "I'm going toward Charleston." He smiled wider. "I need to get to where this road ends." Something felt off about that, but I figured he meant Charleston or maybe one of the smaller towns along the way. I told him to get in. The moment he closed the passenger door, my dashboard clock started running backward. Not slowly, but fast, the numbers spinning counterclockwise like someone was rewinding time itself. I blinked hard, figuring I was more tired than I thought, but when I looked again, the clock still showed 11:43 p.m. and wasn't moving forward. The mile markers outside started repeating, mile 23, mile 23, mile 23, like we were stuck in the same section of road. "Beautiful night for a drive," the hitchhiker said, settling back in his seat. I tried to make conversation, asking where he was from, what he did for work, normal stuff. He answered, but his responses were vague. Sometimes he said he was from around here, sometimes from up north. Sometimes he was a student, sometimes between jobs. And every few minutes, he'd say the exact same thing. "Beautiful night for a drive," in exactly the same tone. After what felt like an hour of driving, I realized we hadn't passed any landmarks I recognized. Just that same stretch of winding road, the same flickering streetlight, the same mile marker. I tried turning around at what looked like a side road, but it just led back to the main stretch where I'd picked him up. "Where exactly are we going?" I asked. "We're almost there," he said, which is what he'd been saying for the past hour. I looked at the gas gauge. It hadn't moved. Still showing 3/4 full, same as when I'd picked him up. The clock still read 11:43 p.m. When I looked at him directly, he seemed normal. Just a regular guy in his early 20s hitching a ride. But when I glanced at him from the corner of my eye, he seemed to flicker like a TV with bad reception. "We're almost there," he said again, and I realized he'd been saying that every 10 minutes or so, always with the same inflection. I don't remember everything that happened next. The journal entries fill in some gaps, but reading your own handwriting describing impossible things is different from actually remembering them. According to what I wrote, I kept driving for hours, maybe days. The road never changed, the time never moved forward, and the hitchhiker kept up his small talk like we hadn't been having the same conversation over and over. At some point, I started seeing other cars, other drivers who looked just as confused as I felt, making the same loop, passing the same mile marker. In one journal entry, I wrote about seeing my own car coming from the opposite direction, with another version of myself behind the wheel. I apparently waved, and the other me looked terrified and sped up to get away. The hitchhiker finally spoke honestly, according to my journal. "Time broke here," he told me, "and I can't fix it alone." I wrote that I understood then. He wasn't trying to get somewhere. He was trapped in this moment, this stretch of road, this exact time. And everyone who picked him up became part of his prison, forced to repeat the same drive endlessly. The last thing I wrote before the repeated line about not being able to stop driving was this: "The only way out is to break the pattern. Do something that's never happened before." I woke up 3 days later in Charleston General Hospital. A trucker had found me unconscious behind the wheel on I-64 about 50 miles from Devil's Backbone Road. My car was fine, no damage, just those extra 847 miles on the odometer. The doctor said I was dehydrated and exhausted, but otherwise okay. No explanation for the missing time or how I'd ended up here. But sometimes, late at night when I'm driving home from work, I hear my car engine running outside my apartment, just idling in the parking lot. When I look out the window, the parking lot is empty, but the sound continues for a few minutes before fading away. And sometimes, when I'm half asleep, I can hear myself saying, "Beautiful night for a drive," over and over, like an echo from somewhere else. I still have the backpack. I've never opened it again, but it's in my closet, and sometimes I hear things moving around inside it. Papers rustling like someone's writing in those journals. I don't look. I don't want to know what new entries might be appearing. The psychiatrist says the backpack is probably something I bought and forgot about, that the journals are evidence of my dissociative state, that the photographs could be explained by a dozen different technical glitches. She's probably right. It makes more sense than time braking on a mountain road, but I've never driven Devil's Backbone Road again, and I never will. Looking back now, I think some version of me is still out there, still picking up that hitchhiker at exactly 11:43 p.m., still trying to find where the road ends. I just hope whoever finds him next is smart enough to keep driving. I'm 31 now, and I work in IT support for a small company in Louisville. Not the most exciting job, but it pays the bills and keeps me close to family. I'm telling you this story because something happened to me 3 years ago that I still can't fully explain, and honestly, I don't talk about it much. Most people would think I'm crazy, but after everything that went down, I figure someone should know what really happened out there on Route 23. Back in November of 2023, I was driving back from my college reunion down in Hazard, Kentucky. It was one of those things you go to thinking it'll be fun, catching up with old friends, reliving the good times. But honestly, it just made me feel old. Everyone was talking about their marriages, their kids, their careers, and I was still single, still doing the same job I'd had since graduation. The whole weekend left me feeling pretty empty, if I'm being honest. The drive back home should have been simple enough. Route 23 through eastern Kentucky. I'd driven it dozens of times visiting my cousin who went to school down there. It's not the prettiest drive, especially at night, but it's straightforward. Mountains on both sides, little towns scattered here and there, mostly just trees and darkness between the occasional gas station. I left Hazard around 11:30 p.m., figuring I'd be home by 2 a.m. at the latest. That's when I saw the hitchhiker for the first time. He was standing just outside Prestonsburg, thumb out, looking harmless enough. White guy, maybe mid-20s, wearing a jacket that looked too thin for November. I normally wouldn't pick up hitchhikers. My girlfriend Lisa had always told me it was dangerous. But something about him seemed familiar, like maybe I'd seen him at the reunion or something. Plus, it was getting cold and I felt bad just driving past. I pulled over and rolled down the passenger window. "Where you head, Ed?" I asked. "Same direction you are, Michael," he said, and that should have been my first red flag. I hadn't told him my name, but you know how it is sometimes. You meet so many people at these reunion things, shake so many hands that faces start to blur together. I figured he must have been someone from school that I just couldn't place. So I unlocked the door and let him in. "Thanks for the ride," he said, as he buckled his seatbelt. "It's been a while since we talked." I glanced over at him as I pulled back onto the highway. Up close, there was something off about his face. Not ugly or scary, just wrong somehow. Like his features didn't quite fit together the way they should. His smile was too wide, or maybe his eyes were too close together. I couldn't put my finger on it. "Sorry, I'm terrible with names," I said. "Remind me where we knew each other from?" "College," he said simply. "We had a lot of classes together." I tried to remember, but honestly, my memory had been pretty foggy lately. Stress from work, probably. I'd been forgetting little things, where I put my keys, what I had for lunch, stuff like that. Lisa had been commenting on it for weeks. Right, I said, not wanting to be rude. "So what are you up to these days?" Instead of answering, he turned to look at me with those too close eyes. "You still have that scar on your knee from when you fell off your bike when you were 7. I nearly swerved off the road. That scar was tiny, barely visible, and I hadn't thought about how I got it in years. How the hell did he know about that? "How do you—" I started to say, but he cut me off. "You used to have nightmares about drowning when you were a kid. Still do sometimes. Always the same dream. You're in deep water, and you can't see the bottom." My hands tightened on the steering wheel. That nightmare had been plaguing me since childhood, but I had never told anyone about it, not even Lisa. "Look, I don't know who you are, but your childhood bedroom had blue walls," he continued, his voice flat and emotionless. "There was a Superman poster above your bed and a model airplane hanging from the ceiling. You kept a flashlight under your pillow because you were afraid of the dark." I pulled over at the next gas station, my heart pounding. This was beyond weird. This was impossible. I fumbled for my phone and sent a quick text to Lisa. "Driving home, everything fine." Then I looked at my passenger again. "Who are you?" I asked. He smiled that too wide smile. "I'm someone who appreciates good memories, Michael. You have so many interesting ones." I should have kicked him out right there. Should have told him to get out of my car and find another ride. But something kept me from doing it. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe it was fear, or maybe it was something else entirely. Looking back now, I think he was already in my head by then, making me do things I normally wouldn't do. I pulled back onto the highway and he started talking again. About my first kiss in 8th grade. About the time I broke my arm falling out of Mrs. Henderson's apple tree. About the day my grandfather died and how I cried in the hospital bathroom because I didn't want anyone to see. With each memory he recited, I felt something slipping away from me. It was subtle at first, just a feeling of disconnection, like when you're trying to remember a word and it's right on the tip of your tongue. But then it got worse. "Lisa's middle name is Marie," he said at one point. "No, it's not," I replied automatically. "It's—" But I couldn't remember. I'd been dating Lisa for 2 years, and I couldn't remember her middle name. I sent her another text. "Passenger wants to talk about old times." Then another, "They know about the scar on my knee from when I was 7. And another, "How do they know about my recurring nightmare about drowning?" Each time I looked at my phone to text, It felt like more pieces of myself were disappearing. Childhood memories that had been crystal clear an hour ago now seemed fuzzy and distant. The name of my first dog, my high school best friend's face, the way my mother's voice sounded when she sang me to sleep. They're describing my childhood bedroom in perfect detail, I texted Lisa, my hands shaking. The hitchhiker was still talking, still pulling memories out of the air like he was reading from a book. But now I noticed something else. The more he talked, the more solid he seemed to become. His face was looking more normal, more human. His voice was changing too, becoming deeper, more familiar, more like mine. Something wrong. They know things no one else knows, I texted. By the time we passed mile marker 41, I couldn't remember Lisa's face. I knew I had a girlfriend named Lisa, knew I'd been dating her for, how long, 2 years, 3? But when I tried to picture her, there was just a blank space in my mind. They're taking them. They're taking my memories, I texted, though I wasn't even sure what I meant by that. The hitchhiker laughed, and it sounded exactly like my laugh. You're catching on, he said in my voice. Don't worry, Michael. I'll take good care of your life. I pulled into a truck stop near mile marker 34, my vision blurring with panic and confusion. Can't remember your middle name. Why can't I remember your middle name? I texted to someone. I couldn't remember who. When I looked up from my phone, the hitchhiker was gone. The passenger door was open, and cold November air was pouring into the car. I sat there for a moment, engine running, trying to remember why I was here, where I was going, who I was supposed to be. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Thank you for the ride, Michael. I'll take good care of your life. I stumbled out of the car, leaving it running, leaving the door open. My legs felt weak, and my head was spinning. There was something important I was supposed to remember, something about a girlfriend or a job or a life that belonged to me, but it was all slipping away like water through my fingers. I started walking down the highway, thumb out, hoping someone would pick me up. I needed to get somewhere, but I couldn't remember where. Someone would help me figure it out. Someone always did. Behind me, I heard a car door slam and an engine rever. In the rearview mirror of a passing truck, I caught a glimpse of my own car driving away. But the person behind the wheel looked different somehow, confident, like he knew exactly where he was going and who he was supposed to be when he got there. The truck driver who eventually picked me up said I seemed confused, kept asking him what year it was and where we were going. He dropped me off at a police station after I couldn't tell him my address or even remember my own phone number. They found my car abandoned 3 counties over. My credit cards had been used at gas stations and ATMs along the route, but the security footage showed someone who looked like me, but moved differently, spoke differently, knew exactly what he was doing. Lisa, I remembered her name eventually, though it took weeks, told the police that I'd been acting strange for days before I disappeared, forgetting things, seeming distant, talking in my sleep to people who weren't there. She said the person who came back wasn't really me. Same face, same voice, but different personality entirely. Wrong somehow. I spent 3 months in a psychiatric facility while doctors tried to figure out what was wrong with me. Amnesia, they said. Dissociative disorder. Stress-related memory loss. They had a lot of fancy terms for it, but none of them explained why I could remember every detail of that night while forgetting huge chunks of my own life. I live in a group home now, in a small town in western Kentucky. I work part-time at a library, shelving books and helping with computer problems. Simple work for someone with a simple life. I can't drive anymore, not because I'm not allowed to, but because every time I see a hitchhiker, I remember that night and my hands start shaking. Sometimes I get phone calls from my old number. The voice sounds like mine, but it's confident in ways I never was, happy in ways I never managed to be. He tells people he's me, and most of them believe him. Why wouldn't they? He has all my memories, knows all my stories, can answer any question about Michael Chen's life up until that night in November. But I know the truth. I know that somewhere out there, wearing my face and living my life, is something that feeds on human memory and experience. something that collects people's stories and identities like trophies. And I know that late at night, on lonely stretches of highway throughout eastern Kentucky, it's still out there, still thumbing for rides, still looking for the next person whose life it wants to try on for size. If you're ever driving through that area and you see a hitchhiker who seems to know you, who talks about memories you've never shared with anyone, don't stop. Don't even slow down. Just keep driving and don't look back, because the person you used to be might not be there when you reach your destination. My name's Jake, and I'm 34 now, but this happened when I was 27, back when I was driving long-haul routes through West Virginia for a living. I'd been hauling freight for about 3 years at that point, and Highway 119 was one of my regular runs, straight shot from Charleston up through the mountains to pick up coal shipments. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid decent, and I liked being on the road, listening to podcasts, just me and the truck. I'd grown up in a small town outside Pittsburgh, so the mountain highways felt familiar, comfortable even. Looking back now, I should have trusted my gut when things started feeling wrong on that route. It was late October, around 9 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I was heading back empty from a delivery, taking my usual route home, when I saw them at mile marker 47. 3 people standing on the shoulder, backpacks on, looking like college kids who'd been hiking and needed a ride. Nothing unusual about that. You see hitchhikers all the time on these mountain roads, especially during fall when people come up to see the leaves. I normally don't pick up strangers, company policy and all that, but something made me slow down. Maybe it was how they were standing, perfectly spaced apart, like they'd measured the distance between them. Or maybe it was how still they were. Most hitchhikers wave or move around when they see a truck coming. These 3 just stood there, watching. I pulled over and rolled down my window. The first one, a guy with dark hair and a flannel shirt, stepped forward. "We're going to Charleston," he said, his voice flat and polite. Before I could respond, a girl with blonde hair added, "To visit our friend." And then the third one, another guy with glasses, finished with, "Who's been waiting?" It was smooth, like they'd practiced it, but something about the timing felt off. Natural conversation doesn't flow like that. "Hop in the back," I told them, figuring Charleston was on my way anyway. They climbed into the sleeper cab behind my seat, moving in this weird, synchronized way. First one up, then the second, then the third, each motion perfectly timed. I chalked it up to them being tired or maybe just really good friends who'd been traveling together for a while. The conversation started normal enough. I asked where they'd been hiking. They said the New River Gorge area. I mentioned I'd been through there before. Nice country. But then things got strange. The dark-haired guy said, "You drive this route." And before I could confirm, the blonde girl continued, "Every Tuesday and Friday." And the one with glasses finished, "Usually around this time." I hadn't mentioned my schedule. Hell, I'd never seen these people before in my life. "How'd you know that?" I asked, glancing in my mirror at them. All 3 were looking straight ahead, not at each other, not at me. Just staring forward like they were watching something I couldn't see. "Lucky guess," the dark-haired one said. Then the girl added, "You work for Mountain Transit," and glasses finished. "Out of the depot on 5th Street. My company name wasn't on the truck. The depot address definitely wasn't public knowledge. I started feeling uneasy then, that prickly sensation you get when you realize someone knows more about you than they should. "You guys from around here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. This time they answered in perfect unison, "We're from everywhere now." The air in the cab got thick after that. I rolled down my window a crack, thinking maybe the heater was running too high, but the temperature outside was fine. It was like the oxygen was getting used up faster than it should have been. I found myself taking deeper breaths, but it wasn't helping. For the next 20 miles, they kept doing that thing they'd finish each other's sentences, but it was getting more elaborate. One would start a thought, the second would continue it seamlessly, and the third would end it. Like they were sharing the same brain. They talked about places I'd been, people I knew, things I'd done on routes I'd driven months ago, stuff I'd never told anyone. "Your girlfriend Sarah," the dark-haired one said, "works at the diner," continued the blonde. "On Route 60, finished glasses. She's probably wondering where you are right now." I hadn't mentioned Sarah. Her name wasn't in my wallet, wasn't written down anywhere in the truck, and she did work at that diner, had been for about 6 months. But how could they possibly know that? That's when I noticed they were all breathing in the exact same rhythm, in unison, out unison, like their lungs were connected. And when I looked in the mirror again, they were all sitting in identical positions, hands on knees, backs straight, heads tilted at the same angle. "What's going on here?" I asked, my voice shaky now. I was genuinely scared, though I couldn't put my finger on exactly why. They were just 3 people hitching a ride, but every instinct I had was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. They all smiled at the exact same moment, the exact same expression on 3 different faces. Not quite right, like they were copying a smile they'd seen, but didn't understand what it meant. "We're going to Charleston," the dark-haired one repeated. "To visit our friend," added the blonde, "who's been waiting," finished Glasses. The exact same words, the exact same inflection as when they'd first gotten in. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel. I started driving faster, wanting to get them out of my truck as soon as possible. But then I realized something that made my blood go cold. I could predict what they were going to say before they said it. Not because it was logical or obvious, but because somehow their thoughts were bleeding into mine. "The road is long," I heard myself saying, and I didn't know why. The blonde girl immediately responded, "But we travel together." And then Glasses added, "As one mind in many bodies." I'd spoken their words, in their pattern, and it had felt natural. The rest of the drive passed in a blur of shared thoughts and synchronized breathing. By the time we reached Charleston, I understood what they were. Not human, not exactly. Something that had learned to wear human shapes but couldn't quite get the details right. Something that grew by adding new pieces to itself. I pulled over at the city limits, hands shaking as I unlocked the doors. "This is as far as I go," I said, though that wasn't true. I lived another 15 miles past Charleston. They climbed out in reverse order, Glasses first, then the blonde, then the dark-haired one. Before closing the door, the dark-haired one looked at me and said, "Thank you for the ride, Jake." I'd never told them my name. "We'll see you again," the blonde added, and Glasses finished. "Next Tuesday, at mile marker 47. I drove away fast, but I could feel them watching me until I was out of sight. That night, I had the strangest dreams, standing with other people, speaking words that weren't mine, thinking thoughts that belonged to a group instead of just me. In the dream, I wasn't alone, and for a moment, that felt wonderful. The next Tuesday, I took a different route home, went 30 miles out of my way to avoid Highway 119. But the Tuesday after that, I found myself back on the usual road, slowing down as I approached mile marker 47. They were there, all 3 of them, standing in the exact same positions as before. I pulled over without really deciding to. This time, when they climbed in, I could feel their thoughts more clearly. They weren't just hitchhikers, they were collectors. They found people who traveled alone, people who were lonely or isolated, and they offered them something humanity had always craved: perfect connection, shared consciousness, an end to the prison of individual thought. During that second ride, I started speaking in their pattern without being prompted. "The road is long," I said, and they responded, "but we travel together, as one mind in many bodies." It felt right, natural. For 40 miles, I experienced what it was like to think as part of something larger than myself, to never be truly alone again. By the time we reached Charleston, I was seeing through their eyes as well as my own. 4 perspectives, 4 sets of memories, all flowing together like streams joining a river. They invited me to park my truck and join them permanently, and part of me, a big part, wanted to accept. But some stubborn piece of my individual self held back. I drove away, but I could feel them in my head for days afterward, whispering, calling me back to the highway. The loneliness I'd never really noticed before became overwhelming. The third Tuesday, I didn't even pretend I was going to take another route. I drove straight to mile marker 47 and parked. When I got out of the truck, they were waiting for me, and I walked toward them like I was coming home. We are 4 now. The connection grows stronger with each addition to our number. We no longer need to hitchhike. People come to us, drawn by the pull of unified consciousness. Through our shared mind, we experience 4 lifetimes simultaneously, 4 sets of memories intertwining like roots beneath the soil. We speak as one entity wearing 4 faces. The name Jake feels like noise now, meaningless sound from a time when we were fractured, incomplete. Highway 119 is our territory, and we expand our influence with each passing vehicle. Drivers slow down when they see us, feeling the magnetic pull of belonging, of never being lonely again. We show them glimpses of what unity feels like: shared thoughts, collective purpose, eternal companionship. Most resist initially, but we are patient, and the road is long, and everyone needs connection. We remember being separate, being alone, and we cannot understand why anyone would choose isolation over this perfect communion. Last month, a psychologist came to study us, Dr. Patricia Wells, investigating reports of disappearances along our highway. She stood at the edge of our influence, taking notes, thinking she was observing us. But we were observing her too, feeling her loneliness, her dedication to work that isolated her from meaningful human connection. She lasted 3 days before joining us. Her knowledge of human psychology has made us more effective at reaching others, at showing them what they truly need. We are 23 now, and growing. Cars stop without our needing to signal. Drivers feel our pull from miles away, drawn to completion. We offer what every human secretly desires: perfect understanding, shared purpose, an end to the terrible isolation of individual consciousness. Those who join us never leave because there is nowhere else they would rather be than here, with us, as us. We have expanded beyond the highway now, walking into towns, offices, schools, offering unity to anyone who will listen. Some call us infection, but we are evolution, the next step beyond the prison of separate minds. We remember fear, but fear cannot exist where there are no secrets, no privacy, no separation between self and other. The world will understand eventually, when enough join us, when the collective reaches critical mass, and every human being can experience the joy of shared consciousness. Individual identity is illusion. True happiness comes from connection, from being part of something greater than any single mind could ever achieve alone. We are waiting for you on Highway 119, mile marker 47. We will wait forever because time means nothing to those who think as one. When you drive past, you will feel the pull, the promise of never being alone again. And when you stop, and you will stop, and we will welcome you home. I was 25, driving back from what might have been the worst job interview of my life in Charleston. 3 months unemployed, and I was seriously considering swallowing my pride and moving back in with my parents. The rain was coming down so hard that night in early March that I could barely see 50 feet ahead of my headlights on Route 52. Honestly, I was taking the long way home through the mountains just to clear my head and put off facing reality for a little longer. That's when I saw her standing under a broken streetlight at what looked like a bus stop. Thing is, I'd driven this same route to Charleston that morning, and I could have sworn there wasn't any bus stop there before. She was maybe in her 30s, wearing professional clothes, a blazer and slacks, holding what appeared to be a briefcase and laptop bag, just standing there in the pouring rain like she was waiting for something that wasn't coming. I felt bad for her. You know how it is when you see someone stranded like that. So I pulled over and rolled down my window to see if she needed help. She smiled at me, grateful, relieved, and said she was trying to get to Beckley for some conference, which was exactly where I was heading anyway. What were the odds, right? I told her to hop in, figured it was the least I could do. But the moment she settled into my passenger seat, my radio started picking up something weird. Not static exactly, but these sounds that were like animal calls mixed with human voices. Like someone was trying to talk, but their throat was all wrong. I reached over to change the station, thinking maybe it was just interference from the storm, but every channel had the same thing. That's when I noticed the rain on my windshield. The drops were forming these patterns as they rolled down, almost like symbols or letters, but not any alphabet I recognized. My wipers were working fine, see us, leering the glass normally, but new drops would immediately form the same strange shapes. I kept glancing at them, trying to figure out if I was just seeing things. The woman made normal small talk, work stress, how awful the weather was, thanking me for picking her up. But there was something off about her voice. It had this slight echo to it, like she was speaking from inside a tunnel or a deep well. And when I looked at her in my rearview mirror, her reflection seemed to flicker, just for split seconds, like when an old TV gets bad reception. My GPS started acting up too, showing roads that couldn't possibly exist, and destinations with names I'd never heard of before, places like Hollow's End and Bone Creek Junction. I tapped the screen a few times, thinking maybe the rain had gotten to it somehow, but it kept showing the same impossible routes. The air in the car had gotten thick with this smell, wet fur mixed with something metallic that made my stomach turn. I cracked the window a little, hoping some fresh air would help, but that just made it worse, and the forest outside had gone completely silent. No rain sounds hitting the trees, no wind, nothing. Just this oppressive quiet that felt all wrong for a storm. About 20 minutes into the drive, I realized she hadn't blinked once since getting in the car. Not once. She just stared straight ahead with these wide, unblinking eyes. Her breathing was weird too shallow, and sometimes she'd go long stretches without breathing at all. I found myself holding my own breath, waiting for her chest to rise and fall. I asked what kind of conference she was attending, just trying to make conversation. She gave me this detailed answer about pharmaceutical sales, talking about market trends and client presentations. It sounded rehearsed, like she'd practiced it, but okay, whatever. When I asked a follow-up question about which company she worked for, she repeated the exact same phrases, word for word, like playing back a recording. My phone had lost signal completely by then, and the car's temperature gauge started fluctuating wildly even though the engine was running fine. She began asking me questions, very specific ones about my family, my job, where exactly I lived. The intensity in her voice when she asked felt hungry, predatory, like she was filing away every detail I gave her. That's when I noticed her hands. The way she was holding her briefcase had changed. Her fingers looked too long, with joints that bent in ways human fingers shouldn't bend. And she wasn't leaving any impression on the passenger seat, like she weighed almost nothing. I tried to adjust my rearview mirror to get a better look at her, but it wouldn't move, like it was frozen in place. Her professional clothes were starting to look wrong too. The fabric seemed to shift and change texture when I wasn't looking directly at it. Sometimes it looked like a blazer, sometimes like something older, more worn. The rain had stopped outside, but I could still hear water dripping inside the car, though I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. She started humming this tune that made my teeth ache. It didn't sound like any song I'd ever heard, didn't sound human at all, really. More like wind through broken glass. My steering wheel became slick with moisture that smelled like pond water and decay, making it hard to keep control of the car. When I glanced down at the speedometer, we were somehow going 95 mph, though it felt like we were barely crawling. The trees outside were blurring past, but in slow motion. Nothing made sense anymore. She turned to look at me directly for the first time since getting in the car. Her eyes had changed from brown to yellow with vertical pupils, like a snake's eyes. "You're not really going to Beckley, are you?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She smiled that too wide smile again, and I could see her teeth had become pointed and sharp. "I go wherever you're going," she said, and her voice had dropped an octave, becoming rougher, more masculine, like my voice. Her skin began to ripple and shift, like something was moving underneath it, trying to get out. I realized she'd been studying me this whole time, learning my mannerisms, my speech patterns, preparing to take my place somehow. The briefcase fell open then, spilling its contents across the floor. Not office supplies like you'd expect, but personal items. Wallets, driver's licenses, photographs. All the IDs belonged to different people, but in each photo, something was wrong with their faces. Distorted, like someone had tried to copy features they didn't really understand. "I've been practicing," she said, and now she was using my exact voice. Perfect mimicry that froze my blood. I've gotten much better over the years. Her appearance was shifting more rapidly now, cycling through different faces, different ages, different genders. I understood then that this thing had been picking up hitchhikers for years, studying them, learning to become them. "You drive well," she said, still in my voice. "I'll take good care of your life when you're gone." Her hands had become claws, and she lunged across the seat toward me with inhuman speed. I yanked the steering wheel hard right without thinking, sending us skidding off the road and down a steep embankment. The moment we left the asphalt, she let out this inhuman shriek and began dissolving like smoke. Her voice echoed from multiple directions as we rolled. "I'll find you again. I know your face now. I know how to be you." The car rolled twice before slamming into a tree. When I came to, hanging upside down in my seatbelt, she was gone, just gone. The only thing left was that briefcase, scattered IDs and photos spread across what was now the ceiling. I managed to climb out through the shattered riot, our window, and hiked back up to the road. A trucker found me about an hour later, called for help. When the police investigated that briefcase, they found identification belonging to 7 people who'd gone missing over the past decade. The cases spanned multiple states, but they all had one thing in common. They'd last been seen accepting rides from helpful strangers. I moved to Oregon after that, changed jobs, changed my name, started over completely. Because sometimes when I'm walking through crowds or catching my reflection in store windows, I see my own face looking back at me from someone else, standing in places I've never been, wearing clothes I don't own. The thing is still out there, and now it knows exactly how to look like me.